welcome to the latest episode of the Dog and Bandits. I'm Warren Phillips,
I'm Mike Farah.
and we have a really great guest today. Is Mr. J.C. Vaughn. Now, he walks kind of both lines of the comic industry. He's a comic creator, but he's also in charge of pricing comics. So it's really a really cool dynamic.
Yeah, he is the president of Gemstone Publishing, which does the Overstreet comic book price guide, which many of you will probably know as kind of the definitive price guide for comics. I know they've had competition over the years, but they are the survivor. They are the definitive source. And as I've said before, I always love hearing from the outer rim, as it were, of the comics universe, those that are not necessarily, writers and artists, although he is a writer, but that do something that is associated with comics. And he has a lot of interesting insights. And this is an Oren only episode, which we love around here. So let's get to it. This is Oren's conversation with J.C. Vaughn.
Mr. Vaughn, thank you so much for taking the time to speak today.
Hey, thanks for having me, man.
You get to do both sides of the comic business. You a comic book creator, and also we're going to talk a little about Overstreet as well. But let's
Absolutely.
start with the very beginning. How did you discover comics?
I don't know the moment I discovered comics. I've thought about this a lot, about how to answer this question, because I have been asked over the years. And I know when the bug bit. My brother and I, we were born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and we always had comics on car trips and that kind of stuff like that. And particularly, we lived for 2 years in northern New Jersey, and made the trips home to Pittsburgh. And that was a lot of interstate driving, mainly with my mom. And usually, if it involved us shutting up, she could spring for the comics. But I grew into, when I was about 12 years old, maybe 11, I grew into allergies. I had a minor hay fever as a little kid, and we lived in front of a woods in New Jersey, and it was just like, hello. And at one point, I had this death rattle cough, and I missed like 5 weeks straight of school. And my brother bought me some comics, and Cap 188 was in there. And I'm old enough that I remember when Vietnam was going on, and in the aftermath of that in the country. I was raised in a patriotic household, and Cap was that suddenly this outlet. Here's this guy that fought in World War II, when the bad guys were clear-cut villains,
Mhm.
And it really appealed to me. And of course, I was immediately unaware of the arc that had just preceded that, with Cap being disoriented. Now, of course, I discovered that in fairly short order, but I was hooked, and I was off to the races from that point. We moved back to Pittsburgh. I discovered Ides Comics, which in those days was located at 11 Federal Street, where PNC Park now stands in downtown Pittsburgh. And it was and is to this day a great comic shop, and they cultivated that. My first day back in school, when I moved back to Pittsburgh, I had a Marvel Mead Trapper Keeper notebook.
Nice.
And there was one open seat on the first row in my fourth period algebra class, or it might have been math, might have been algebra the next year. And they put me in that seat, and the kid in front of me turned around and goes, "Hey, do you collect comics?" And he is my best friend to this day.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So,
and really, over the span of about 2 years, just everything compresses and focuses me into comics.
when did you think, maybe as profession, you wanted to get or dabble into comics a little bit?
I first started plotting things, um, unaware of what a comic book script looked like, or the fact that there was no standard for it.
Mhm.
I was 14, and it heard the stories of this legendary kid from Bethel Park, who was like just a couple towns over from Mount Lebanon, where I grew up, that had written the Legion of Superheroes and then was writing for Marvel Comics. And now the funny thing for me is, and Jim Shooter and I have talked about this over the years, is that what I was planning was basically Secret Wars.
Wow.
I was plotting a thing that ran through all the series, taking advantage of the fact that it was a universe. I was trying to corral my other friends to write parts of it. I was like, I was orchestrating the whole thing in my head, and and that was the first thing. Though in terms of being a writer in general,
Mhm.
there's a good indication that I knew in third grade. I we had to do various creative projects. I had a really great third grade teacher, taught us to count to 1,000,000 as a class. Yeah, we literally took the whole school year bringing in kernels of popcorn and put them in, count, count, count. That was it for the day. Save it, keep going. And the news was there when we hit the million and all that kind of stuff like that. She was a very, very creative old school teacher.
Mm.
And but one of the things I did in that class was write make up a fake newspaper. And it was the first time where I realized that I could take the kid that I didn't like, was a bit of a bully, and put him on the masthead as the janitor. And I found that a few years ago at my mom's house in Texas, and I was quite delighted with myself. And the other thing is I knew. So there's the early indication, right? I knew the day I saw Star Wars.
Okay.
And I had no, and it wasn't I was going to write Star Wars. I knew I was going to be a writer. I like literally come out of the darkened movie theater, clouds part, angels sing, sun shines down, you know, done.
Wow. And so, what was your first big writing project?
I didn't have a big one, any of
Mhm.
my first ones. I had a lot of big attempts that just crashed and burned because I didn't know better, but that's how you do it.
Right.
Um, high school newspaper
Mhm.
in Pittsburgh. Then I moved to Texas my junior year. High school newspaper. Walked in for my senior year for the meeting of the staff right before the school year starts,
Mhm.
and Mr. Washman, our journalism advisor, uh, has all of us assembled. And he says, and our editor for this year is Jeff. And I'm looking around, who the heck is the other Jeff? I didn't know there's another Jeff on the staff. Everybody's looking at me. And yeah, there we go. And then I continue that in junior college.
Mhm.
I met people that I work with to this day.
Mhm.
My first day in junior college, and my second and also my second year of junior college. There's people that I work with. My friend James Nelms, who has illustrated a bunch of my covers,
Mhm.
drew my first comic strip in the college newspaper. Yeah,
How
so
big how big a thrill was that though, seeing your creation kind of come to life that way?
and making sure the artist got paid for it. And now the funny thing was, it was a college newspaper, man. It paid $5 a cartoon, right?
Right.
So if James needed a couple extra bucks, I'd make it a 4 panel instead of a 3 panel, and so he'd get $5 more. Yeah, it was like that. Um, Cost of living was significantly less. I think we were like $8 a semester hour at that point.
Oh wow. That's not bad at all.
Yeah,
So let's talk a little bit about your current project, which I
sure.
think is one of the most um, inventive and creative books I've read and seen in quite some time. Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, if you mean Al Capone
Ah,
Vampire,
yes.
all right. Well, uh, I uh, I started out. I met the Frame brothers, Brendan and Brian, a number of years ago. A guy who at the time worked for Heritage Auctions, John Petty, introduced us, and I very quickly had them do a cover for a free comic book day issue of for Overstreet, and then I pitched a weekly Sunday size newspaper strip to the Antique Trader. My friend Catherine Saunders Watson was the editor, at the time, and it was a romantic comedy mystery adventure set in the world of pop culture collectibles. Uh, when I when I put it together in a book, Paul Levitz read it, and he sent me a note. Does Steve Jeppy know you killed him? Because the inciting event was this gazillionaire collector is passed away and set in motion this huge auction. And of course, these people trying to steal stuff and romantic triangle and all this. Well, the frames drew it, and what I discovered was that, man, and I'm not saying, I'm in no way denigrating any of the great artists who work in our field, but a lot of people who can draw superhero comics can't draw regular people that are interesting. These guys can draw regular people, and we've found over the years that we tend to work pretty well together. We've collaborated on a number of projects. So I came to them with Vampire PA. And Vampire PA, the basic premise is it's an HVAC repairman who fights vampires in his spare time. And I seem to be in love with the idea of working class guy versus monsters. Zombie Proof is about a locksmith who fights zombies, and I'm sort of working my way through the places I've lived. Zombie Proof set in Texas. Vampire PA is set one town over from where I grew up in Pittsburgh. So my friends from Mount Lebanon would ask me, why is it set in Dormont, Mount Lebanon? And I could reply, all the bloodsuckers I know in Mount Lebanon are lawyers. I'll go a long way for a joke.
There you go.
It's sad, but absolutely.
It works. It's the landing.
But what I did was I created this. There was this grand old movie theater. It was called the South Hills Theater. And it was a neighborhood movie theater, old school stage, balcony, incredible organ, just, you know, left over from the heyday of cinema. And it had been subdivided into 4 theaters and a bunch of crap, and it was just horrible, and it was dilapidated. And one day I was driving by when I was back visiting, and this is long after I'd moved to Texas and then Baltimore, and I thought, there's probably some vampires in there, and which seems like a normal thing for a normal person to say, right? But I took a bunch of reference photos from online. Thankfully, they were there, and that was the start of it. And like the week after our first issue was published, the place was torn down for a CVS because we needed another CVS. And excuse me, and so we did the miniseries. It went over fairly well. Then we crowdfunded a one-shot called Vampire PA Bite Out of Crime. And in the middle of writing that, I'm just like, I'll put Al Capone in here. And I don't know why. It's a compelling figure, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Capone, the popularity of Capone, this is where the 2 parts of my brain come together. The great thing about comics history is there's all sorts of lessons there in what were people's motivations for developing characters, introducing characters, publishing them, and what have you. And the unfortunate historical popularity of Al Capone is what caused the creation of Dick Tracy. Dick Tracy was absolutely a reply to the popularity of the criminals. And that lesson was really never very far. There's a couple of Capone-esque strips in early Dick Tracy, which are not corny at all. His fiance and then eventually his wife, her father is killed by the mob, and they're called the Blood Dailies, and they're very classic early Dick Tracy strips. And so I'm knowing that history, I'm like, I can have Capone in there, and he can be a vampire. Now I just have to figure out, why is he in Pittsburgh? Why is he not in Chicago? And what was great about this was just schedule wise, I never did the follow up for a while. But then I started going, Al Capone Vampire is a really, really good title. And the origin started unfolding. The more I read about Capone, the more I'm like, oh, I know how this goes. And so, number one's out there. Number two is at the printer right now. We crowdfunded that. Number three, we are roughly 17 pages into that. 11 of which are colored, 10 of which are lettered. So we're moving through that pretty quick. I think number three will be crowdfunded fairly soon. Like maybe starting in July. If I get the other book and it is shipping, I never want to listen. I've got enough projects that I could overlap them like crazy. I would rather not, because I don't have anybody but my family to ship them. but it's and I think it's going to be double sized.
Okay.
The 32 page version of these books, all the books are at least 48 pages because they've got other stories in them, other material, some bonus material, some of them are like DVD extras, some of them are like number two has a complete graphic novella from an unrelated story in it. There will be comic shop versions of these that don't have the extra material.
You said something very interesting a moment ago, is what you said when you're doing the history on Al Capone, everything kind of clicked. Now, for you, do you have an end game in mind? Do you have this thing planned out as to how you want this to go and how you want it to end?
Yeah, you know what? What's really funny, Al Capone itself is actually going to be a bit open-ended. Okay. Vampire PA, I absolutely do, and they're still strung together at this point. Mm-hmm. A lot of the characters from Vampire PA are very prominent in Al Capone Vampire. At some point, they will disentangle because there is an end game for Vampire PA that will take them to Europe. Mm-hmm. And might bring in another vampire. And we'll see how that falls. I think Brendan and Brian are going to take a crack at writing one of them. My original short story that started this property was called Vampire Hunter Dean, and that is just me looking at anime going, yeah, what if that was Dean instead of D? And it has nothing to do with that. It's just the way my brain works. And I've got enough other projects going on, and the Frame Brothers have been stretching their writing wings. They do a book with Todd Livingston and Nick Kapitanakis called Starring Sonia Devereaux. And they have this B-movie scream queen kind of character. And so the books sort of drift in and out of her making these atrociously bad movies. Like, they'd get an upgrade to be Sci-Fi Saturday Night kind of movies. But they've written the next one of those. And so I threw out the idea of, like, you guys want to do this, and I'll play editor and I'll tweak the dialogue and make sure it's where I want it to be. Because I've got a couple other projects that are going on, and in the fall, I know that I'm going to run into one of those that's going to be a little bit of a stumbling block time-wise for us. And they are so prolific. Literally, I've seen a page come in while we've been on. And this is where I'm the total fanboy. It is so hard not to go click. In the middle of an interview, I'm in an interview talking about stuff I want to talk about, and it's still like,
go crazy, go for it.
Yeah. So, but that's so apparently I got one inked page and one new pencil page, because that just
very nicely done.
Yeah, it's what happens when you got twin brothers and one does one and one does the other.
It works out pretty well. It's a nice team.
Yeah, absolutely.
Writing supernatural, and also, these books, a little mystery as well.
Yeah.
What's the key ingredients, do you think, to make an interesting story using those two things?
Oh, yeah, that's a really great question. And I'm rarely asked that, and I really appreciate it. I think I sort of stepped into this area a little bit earlier, which, talking about Brendan and Brian drawn regular people. Mm-hmm. Okay. And regular people. I think the interest in horror and the supernatural, in parts of science fiction, are really distinctly how would regular people react to these impossible situations. And to me, that's the fun stuff to write about, because take something horrible like death of a loved one.
Mhm.
There's so many different ways we react to that. I remember when my dad passed, there was something where my brother said, we had these great groups of people, ladies from my mom's church, bringing us meals. And my brother said, "Oh, Dad would have loved this." And I said, "Look what happened to him." And it was not the right thing to say, but it's everybody reacts differently to stuff
Mhm.
like that. And and to me, like, if you're confronted by a werewolf,
Mhm.
if being incredulous is not part of your reaction, maybe terrified first, incredulous second, but maybe the order is switched.
Mhm.
But if you're not one of those two, this is not a convincing werewolf, and you're a person who's watched too many horror movies. Because
Mhm.
if you're not surprised by this, right? And so that's the essence of where my characters come from, this reaction. I tend to drop into a lead character, tends to be, sooner or later they get businesslike about it. Like, okay, this is really crazy. We got to deal with it. And not all the characters will understand that or agree,
Mhm.
but there will be one character, because to me, you always got somebody in a situation who maybe freaks out later, but deals with it while the thing's going on.
That makes sense. What's the biggest learning curve you've had in this whole process?
Oh wow, there's always one.
Okay.
The humbling thing is, I'm a pretty decent manager.
Mhm.
Like, I've had a bunch of jobs where I've had employees, and I'm pretty good about finding the right people and bringing their talents together. And this, I felt, was true in my first career, which was at Avis Rent a Car,
Mhm.
and in the career I have now, and in my sideline as a creator. Uh, the 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 difficult thing is that the challenge is always on you to explain yourself better, so the people that are using their time to support what you're doing come don't have to redraw a page, don't have to recolor something because you didn't give them enough descriptions, don't have to re-letter it because you didn't designate something was a sound effect, not dialogue.
Mhm.
And there's always something to think about the person down the line. Whatever business you're in, the last two people to touch a project are always squeezed for time. They're the ones who everybody else counts on to make up the time. Letterers get beat up in our business, colorists too, designers, whoever's getting the book last. Like, hey, can you do this overnight? That kind of stuff. And so if you can go in with the thought process of that, your challenge will always be on yourself, of how do you minimize that. And you have to also recognize sometimes it's going to be like that. Sometimes you see that thing like, oh, if we do this, the next issue is going to rock, and you got to go fix it. But
Right.
that to me is the permanent learning curve on this kind of stuff. The other thing is, there's always something to learn about the creative process.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's more like a workflow management kind of thing. The creative process is, man, there's guys who are machines and can knock this stuff out immediately. Uh, I'm If I was doing this full time,
Mhm.
I have to imagine I would be tremendously faster, because I'm not a slow writer.
Mhm.
Um, it's just, what do you spend your time doing? What are the muscles you're working out, 3 days a week at the gym, and that's it. The writing I do for work is substantially different, though, about comics.
Mhm. I was going to say, could you see in a different, let's say, dimension or different timeline, you doing this full time, or
Oh
did
yeah,
you need
sure,
to do
absolutely,
this?
absolutely.
Mhm.
One of the things I joke about pretty regularly because it's true. If I hated my day job, I'd be way further along as a creator. I mean, shoot, you know, my writing partner Mark Haynes out in Los Angeles, uh, he he was working for a financial company, and then for their sister company or their subsidiary or whatever like that. And they were based in Switzerland. So, and he moved to the West Coast, where when I moved to the East Coast. And so he's getting up for meetings in Zurich or Geneva or whatever in Los Angeles. So he's like getting up in the middle of the night. So when he took the plunge into being a writer producer and when raised money for his projects, he's made great use of his time since then, because he's not doing what he I won't say hated, but he's not just paying the bills.
Would you ever think about moving to do a superhero comic, one that it's, not the normal person, it's the above normal person to do that kind of genre?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Like everybody else in our entire industry, I have a superhero universe in my head.
Okay.
Um, I have about 2 issues in the can, and about 5 more written.
Mhm.
And my problem is they've got to be done right. I picked the right story partner for this, but it's one of those things where that would be a big time suck. And sooner or later I'll do part of it as a crowdfunded book or something like that. Um, but yeah, absolutely. And out of the existing characters, there are ones that I'd love to get a shot at writing. Nobody's going
Mhm.
to hand them to me. And I'm pretty okay with that. Nine out of 10 times I'd rather be writing my own stuff anyway, because uh, in the end I'll own it. But yeah, you gave me a Cap miniseries. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Magnus too. No,
Yeah.
as far as I'm concerned, and some freaking awesome writers have tried. Um, nobody but Russ Manning and uh, Jim Shooter have written Magnus excellently, and nobody's drawn him like Russ Manning, but nobody's written it like Jim Shooter.
Yeah.
And I
Agreed.
and I've had a bunch of conversations with Jim about it, and there's this thing that I think I get, and I would because yeah, here's the basic setup for this. Captain America, Superman, and Magnus are all about what the other characters think of them. Mark Waid's first issue of Captain America 444. Um, Cap was in what, 2 flashback panels, 1 flashback panel? The whole book. It's about what other characters thought of him. And it's just like such a tremendous first issue. And Superman, that I thought was boring when I was a kid, was because Superman had grabbed a criminal, Lex Luthor, or just a burglar, fly down, drop him off to the cop, and the cop go, "Hey, Superman, thanks." Not like, "Holy crap, it's Superman,"
Right.
right? It's got to be, "Holy crap, it's Superman." So you're in the year 4001 in the continent spanning city of Northam with your beautiful attire and your beautiful girlfriend in your beautiful world, eating a beautiful meal, and your robot waiter suddenly tries to kill you. A guy wearing a mini dress and go-go boots
Yes.
jumps through the ceiling and chops him in half with his bare hand. If you don't freak out, you don't get it.
Right.
And that's what I swear that's what so many great writers have not got about Magnus.
Mhm.
There's got to be that wow factor. And the guys who act like they're not the wow factor are the sycophants. And that's cool because you
Mhm.
need characters like that. And or the villains.
Mhm.
But the average Joe has to be, particularly in a world where the robots do all the labor. Here's this guy doing something incredibly physical. It's got to be like that. So listen to me pitching to whoever has Magnus now.
Well, what is your blueprint for what a superhero should be? What are some characteristics that a character needs to have to make them the superhero?
Wow, that's really good. I love the military sense of duty.
Mhm.
I think whether to a nation, to mankind, to a city, individual, I love the detective aspect of Batman. I love the relentless pursuit of making himself better into this character. The slightly mystical version of that with the and more ruthless version of that with the Shadow. I think Superman has proven terrifically hard for a lot of really good writers to write. Same reasons I was just talking about Magnus. Um, because if you read like Superman for All Seasons by Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale, I think if you don't get choked up at least one point in that book, you're something wrong with you. And that really was a great reminder that Superman is all about who's writing it and their approach to it. And no disrespect to the artists who have to carry the load of this, but it starts with the story.
I want to bring up something that you are a part of with your book, but it's the rise of these independent books, the rise of the crowd-funded books. From your perspective, is it changing the game as far as comics go, that more and more of these independent books are out there?
Yeah, I think it is, and I think that it's not done changing, because I think that many of them will find their ways into comic shops. We as comic book people, I'm not here to rag on anybody. I take comics as a very big positive, and I'm bloody well aware that every day I go to work in a business that I love, and that, but we are, and listen, man, I do variant covers. I get it. Okay. But we're strip mining. And it's fun to chase after the variants if it's a series you collect. If this is a series you're really keen on, and it's totally cool to buy one cover and move on to the next book. Pick the one you like the best. Or if maybe you don't even care about it because you like the character so much, I'll just take whichever, that's fine. But there's a lot of stuff that's been just about the covers lately. And I think that a lot of the crowdfunded guys are creating work that's almost akin to a new golden age in terms of the different directions that people are going, the stories that they're willing to tell. The thing that they can't do is do them frequently enough to sustain the normal interpretation of what the direct market's going to demand. I think there's ways around this. I think people will find it. There are people far more creative than me that will say, this is how we'll do this. And I know that there are people out there right now that are open to that process and are looking to do that. I'll use my friend Billy Tucci as an example. Billy has done 3 books in his Return of the Warrior series. He co-wrote them with Steve Peros, and has produced. They're just beautiful, and they're graphic novels. They're each in the 56, 64 page range. And one of the things that Billy has had back in the days where she Way of the Warrior was selling more than Batman, was Billy's timeliness was his Achilles heel. Well, if he serializes those books, he's 9 months ahead. And they are exceptional work. And it's very hard for me to believe that he won't find an audience in comic shops for that. And I think I think there's a lot of guys out there that are creating a backlog of this stuff. Some of them are creating their own little interconnected universe in a series of graphic novels. And some of it won't lend itself to being serialized, but they will. But the graphic novels could be well served being in the direct market. I think that there's somebody will unify some of these guys or give them an umbrella under
Mhm.
which to unify.
Makes sense. Let's talk about your day job. President of Gemstone Publishing.
Indeed.
Earlier this year. Congratulations on
Thank
that.
you very much.
How did you first start with Gemstone?
I had freelanced. When I mentioned my first career at Avis Rent-A-Car, I had got to the point uh, where I was afraid not to do what I knew I was supposed to be doing. And I mentioned I knew rather young that I was supposed to be a writer. Circumstances called, I needed a job. And some friends of mine from junior college that I keep talking about, also guy I worked with at my first job in comics, which was Lone Star Comics in their mail order department, and which is now mycomicshop.com, um, uh, went out to Avis. My same guy that I mentioned is James Nelms, my cover artist on many things, was the first of us out there, and several of others of us followed. I grew up in an airline family. Going to the airport for a job seemed like a natural. And I figured I'd be there 3 months. I was there just shy of 12 years and learned everything. All the basics I know about management, I learned there. And I thought the day I left, okay, I'll never use that stuff again. I'll just be friends with all these people. Well, wrong. I am friends with all those people, but I use the management stuff every day. But the last, say, 14 months that I was there, I went to my bosses and told them, I said, listen, I got to pursue this. And you guys know that I won't slack off at all till the day I leave. You know, you're going to get 100% from me. And they knew it and they supported me, and the way good bosses do. And they really encouraged me. And I went out and I started making connections. My first published interview was Terry Moore's first published interview about Strangers in Paradise. We didn't even know where it was going to go, and all of a sudden, the people back in the days where there were 20 or so distributors, Styx Distribution reached out to him and wanted to run an interview with him in their catalog, and like, boy, it came together really quick. We had been working on it, and boom, off go, and it literally came out a day before my first published article for Bob Overstreet. And when Bob sold his company, Overstreet Publications, to Steve Geppe's Gemstone Publishing, some of his people didn't want to make the move from Tennessee. I jumped at the chance, and I made the move from Texas to Maryland. And I joined the staff as associate editor. I was a few years older than the other guys, since I had had a first career. And it was great. I mean, I was literally walking right down the hall and asking Bob Overstreet questions. I've been reading the price guide. I'd seen the price guide since number 6 with that great Spirit cover. And then very shortly after that, I saw number 5 with Joe Kubert's Tarzan cover. And the first one I got was number 8. So I've been reading it actively that long. And so I say, my job is I run a book I grew up reading, and which is, I mean, who gets to say that? Come on.
So what is your vision now for it going forward?
Oh, okay, sure. I think the first thing is, one of the things that we've achieved and are still achieving is the creation of Overstreet Access, which is overstreetaccess.com, which is a online version of the guide. There is an enormous amount of free material. It is encyclopedias, character appearances, everything but the pricing and the collection management software ability that are included. I said software, which is wrong because it's not computer resident, but it is on its way to being freaking phenomenal. We added one of the things we've never been able to do in the guide, which has been anybody in print, it's been our Achilles heel, has been the variants. It is a genuine disease in comics. Because like I said, I don't want to be the one to say no. Why would I do that? but it's first off, it's none of my business. You know, I'm a guide. I'm supposed to reflect what's going on, not lead what's going on.
Mhm.
But at the same time, we've added 92,000, and that's not a third of what we're adding. And let me tell you, those didn't come from the golden age. They didn't come from the silver age. They didn't come from the bronze age. You know, we're really this is where I start saying we're strip mining. And when you start seeing an aggregate, my Sean Sipple, our architect of it, called me and goes, yeah, we just we're ready to add 212,000 more. And I'm like, I'm really proud that we're adding them.
Right.
And I knew when we weren't adding them to the print book, I knew that these things were out there. I had no bloody idea how many. You know, my standard joke is, it's 90. We just added 92,000 variants, and that was July.
Right.
You know, not that bad, but we're close.
Well, let me ask you about these.
So that's a long-winded answer to the first part of your question, which is what's my vision for this, and that is something that is shared with Steve Jeppe and our staff, that we want to do this. We came out of the gate a little soft on Overstreet Access because we didn't have the variants. We knew that. We've added that. We've added an export and import tool, so you can bring in either collections from your own CSV file or from an Excel doc or things like that, and match them up a lot quicker than doing it manually. There's still a manual component where you have to check off, is this yet, but it'll identify them for you. And so we've got that, and the import I think is in beta, which it's a what we called an open beta, because literally everybody who's a member can use it. And we have to get some feedback on it to make sure it's working the way we think it is. But we've done a lot of stuff to try and crash it, and it seems to be responding pretty nicely. And listen, somebody's going to come along and find a thing to crash it, and I hope that they'll tell us about it. The thing that I love so much about our attitude is it's very reflective of what Bob Overstreet started with the price guide. Bob went about 2 months after Price Guide 1 came out in 1970 of thinking, okay, I'll go on to another project. He wasn't sure that he needed to do another price guide. You know, he wasn't thinking that prices were going to keep changing. And that was about 2 months. That was the last time that the price guide wasn't evolving. So the same thing that we're doing is we're seeking as much input as we can. Literally every page of the listings has a feedback button that even lets you do screen captures and send them to us if they're wrong. We're so hungry for that kind of stuff. And, you know, it's sooner or later, our volume is going to increase to where we can't do this. But I know in the computer world, people are freaking stunned when they send in what they think is a complaint, and Sean, our architect, calls them, goes, hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about we do this? Hey, could you take a look at it now? And they're blown away by this because, you know, I mean, you know, okay, we're not exactly Amazon, right? we're you know, we're a small outfit, and here we are. We literally got one of those when we launched. We were at San Diego last year, and a retailer who I happen to know went on, and I was at the booth with Sean, and he goes, hey, do you know this guy? Yeah. He goes, I'm going to call him. He called him like 3 minutes after the guy sent the complaint. And then everybody who's had that experience, and like I said, we have not done a big push because we had to add these variants. I don't want to try and capture customers twice. I don't want them to come on, see like all these variants we don't have, and then try and go get them again. You know, it's an expensive way to do it, because we're up and running and weren't pushing for a lot of memberships. But that is a major component of it. What the database is going to allow us to do, because by this time next year, I'm going to be able to export from the database straight to InDesign. So when I go in and say, I want to do the Overstreet Comic Book Price Guide to War Comics, we'll be able to do that without a gazillion man hours in it and sell just a few thousand copies of a book, where with the price guide, I sell tens of thousands, and I justify the man hours involved in creating this behemoth. And that's one of the things we're doing. One of the first books we did last year was the Overstreet Comic Book Price Guide to Lost Universes.
Mm-hmm.
And this is my template for books that I would like to do. You'll see in here, we got prices underneath the books. It's a photo journal. There's room for articles, bits of original art, all that kind of stuff like that. And it deals with the specialties. Man, I'd love to get to the point where, and nobody's going to get all these books because nobody collects every genre. But seriously, wouldn't it be great if you had some kind of primer on the really key romance books, where you're looking at John Romita art, or Buscema, or Frank Springer, or any of the guys that do beautiful work like that. Again, what would I sell for that? I don't know, maybe 2,000 copies, maybe. But if I don't have 1 million hours in the book, we could make a go of it. And so I want to do a lot. The price guide, you have to imagine reasonably that we will cannibalize some of our print sales to as more and more people adopt Overstreet Access. That said, I think we're going to be doing more print in a very short time. That some of it'll just be specialty stuff like that. And you as a collector are not going to get the romance book, but your buddy's going to get the war book, or you're going to get the price guide to Captain America, or that kind of stuff like that. And the great thing is, because we've also published Hake's Price Guide to Character Toys, we could do a character specific book that was not only the comics, but the related toys.
Wow.
And the related promotional materials. And I've had some discussions with Marvel about that. And I don't think I'm giving anything away by saying that, because they don't have the reference that they need. And listen, somebody else, if they can come out and do it faster or better, I want the book. Mm-hmm. But I think we'll be the ones to do it.
It's a really, really good strat. Wow. I'm absorbing all this. I'm like, that makes a whole lot of sense. Just
seriously, I mean, think about where we are now. Mm-hmm. Okay. You and I have been doing this a while, right? I've been doing it a long time. I can't get, somebody drops a lot of money on me for Al Capone for Hollywood. Okay, maybe I can get it. Maybe I can get Amazing Fantasy 15. I don't see it happening otherwise.
Right.
But I love that. A Cap 1? Are you kidding me? And I would have the biggest blast with that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. But I think that the thing there is, I want to reflect what's out there in the market. Mm-hmm. And I was a good guy to work with Bob Overstreet, because it's important to me that we're depicting accurately what's going on. Mm-hmm. And my brain, when I get talking about this stuff, my brain fires in so many different directions.
I want to ask your opinion, because you brought up the variant covers a few times. Do you see a buyer burnout with this trend, that folks are just going to be like, oh, I just don't want to deal with?
Yeah. When one of the things when you offer too many choices, and we're capitalist, we live in a capitalist society. We're all about choices. I think that this is gut. I have done no scientific studies on this. I've read some stuff. But at some point, when there's too many choices and you can't get all of them, sometimes you choose to get none of them. And and this is not a conscious running away from the thing you used to collect. It's an atrophy, and that's therefore much quieter. And then sooner or later, this guy stops coming in, And sooner or later, he stops answering your calls because his pull box list has gotten so big and it's just sitting there. And it's, if you talk to the retailers who don't take credit cards ahead of time for a pull list, this is a real thing. People just, now I'm not talking about for medical emergencies and stuff like that, because everybody knows that stuff happens. But I'm talking about the guys who just were super enthusiastic, who suddenly have their ability to stop getting everything stripped away. And it comes down to, do you need 47 Wolverine titles? Do you need 80% of comics output in a month to be Batman? No, you need great Batman stories. You need great Batman stories about which you can't shut up. Right? Why are we still talking about Batman Year One? Because it's good. Why are we talking about Thor 337 or Cap 110 or pick the great issues, pick the great runs, pick the great arcs? Why are we still talking about them? You know, they're not because, oh, there were 47 million variant covers.
Is that, how do you guys handle? No, but it's fascinating what you have to say. This is wonderful. How do you handle the spec market with what's going on? You know, you have people, everything's based on what the MCU and DCU is doing. You get people speculating, saying, "Oh, I heard that X character is going to be in this episode of Loki," and suddenly that book's very popular. And after the episode comes out, it's back in the dollar bins. How do you handle those trends?
Yeah, that's a great thing. It's one of the things why before Overstreet Access, I can say one of the reasons that Bob Overstreet never chased that market and let it come to him, because we would take our lumps like, oh, the guy's not current on issue 27 of Goat Rider. And the real truth of it was, because by the time the guide came out, it would be back down to a different price. You know, and we should report on anything that is a legit movement in the market, and we should not put ourselves in the position very often of deciding what is legit. That said, one of the great things Bob has never done is he's never moved the price of a book because of a one sale. Like the first Action Comics #1 to hit $1 million, Bob did not automatically jack the price of to Action 1 to $1 million. It took a while, because one sale isn't the market. If you look at how long between the first sale of Amazing Fantasy 15 for $1 million and then for it later, you're talking years. And you never know somebody's motivation. If they're trying to make a splash, make a statement, make their other books appear to be worth more. There's all sorts of reasons for this. Who am I to question their legitimacy? You know, but you can't pretend that there aren't a bunch of reasons that kind of stuff goes. So our thing has always been, let the market tell us what's going on. We have well over 100 advisors that contribute to us on a regular basis. We look for data. We monitor the auctions, the public auctions. And we talk to guys who are collectors. We talk to guys who are dealers, and we talk to guys who are historians. And we really have a pretty good group of people, and we're always looking for others who are absolutely willing to spend their time getting us data and go from there.
This one, it's gonna be both sides of you, but we just talked about the independent books.
Yeah.
With what's going on now with the Kickstarters and stuff like that.
Yeah.
What is their future price wise in guides like this? What is there a threshold they have to hit in order to, you know, how are we ever going to know what these are going to be valued?
I think that's a great question. I think given the limited print runs, now this is totally off the top of my head, which, as you can see, is nothing to hide. I believe that the prices of those books should be the baseline price that they were crowdfunded for an issue. Like, what was the lowest price you could get an issue, not the bells and whistles and the bookmarks and other stuff that we all do. But to say what's it going to cost you, that should be the price of it. And the reason I feel that that's both workable and ethical is we're talking about stuff with really small print runs by comparison. Now, some of these guys have print runs that would crush mine, but they're still smaller than what the smallest Marvel book is going to do. And some of them are well on a par with the other publishers beyond Marvel and DC. Some of them are selling that many copies. But so my thought about this is just that it goes in at that price. It may be that we would not compel in any way, what was your print run? Because if we want to be able to reflect the scarcity and justify a price, because one of the things we haven't seen yet is tons of copies of Cyberfrog on eBay or changing hands at dealers, because the people who got them are pretty happy with them. And because it's fairly recent. 10 years from now, people will have kids going to college, people have that, and all of a sudden some of these books will show up, right? But it'll be cyclical, just like every other part of business. But it is something that I've been toying with. And one of the things that we'll be doing over the course of the second half of 2023 is a real outreach that we've always done to the publishers, to this community, of saying, hey, send a copy of your book to the guide. I don't need an individual copy of every cover, but I do need a physical copy that this exists. You can send us a PDF of all the variants. But that's what I think, because it's a great question. How do we handle this? How do we represent the market? Because this stuff is out there. You have some very noteworthy creators that have gone this direction now, for a variety of reasons, some of which are just the basic, I want to own my own stuff. And nobody would publish it.
Yeah.
They might be a superstar at DC or Marvel, and neither of those companies have creator-owned imprints right now.
So one thing, I had the pleasure of speaking to you at Ithacon, and we were talking a little bit about the art that you guys get for your price guides. Like, I think we spoke a little bit about this one right here.
Yeah, absolutely.
And how cool is it as a fan to see this original art come in and to choose what the theme is for each cover?
And what's really great about, now, I will say this, the age we live in, the original art never comes in anymore.
Yeah.
That's the part, that's the part I miss.
Mm-hmm.
But when seeing this stuff come in, and overwhelmingly it's stuff that I've commissioned, it's I'm a freaking raging fanboy, man. When somebody understands the importance of the guide, my favorite covers come from artists who get the guide and who think of it as a bucket list item career-wise. And we owe that to Bob Overstreet. Don Newton illustrated number 4, the first cover with original art on it. And that was sort of before he was Don Newton, Batman artist, and Don Newton, Infinity Inc. and stuff like that. But he was already a good artist. But look at number 5, 6, and 7. 5 is Kubert. 6 is Eisner. 7 is Barks. So I'm very candid about this. That is the gauntlet that has been thrown down in front of me every year when I go to get guide covers. And I'll come up short here and there, but I'll also put my average up against anybody. I'm a humble guy, but I won't do false humility. False humility is like begging for a compliment. And I'm not begging, man. Look at that Ethan Van Sciver one that you just held up there. Okay, you know what I love about that? Aside from the fact that it's a freaking great cover, I got a call from Bob Overstreet saying that may be my favorite cover.
Wow.
Because he loves Flash and he loves Green Lantern.
Mm-hmm.
And I've also said, there's this just like the rest of freaking society, there's this political thing in comics of, oh, this guy's too right wing, this guy's this.
Mhm.
Okay. I think the way I tell you how I handle this kind of stuff. Ethan Van Sciver, very openly on the right.
Mhm.
Same year, Howard Chaykin doing American Flag, one of my all-time favorite comics.
Mhm.
And I said, and God bless Ryan Sook, who did Planet of the Apes cover. I have no idea what his politics are. And but all three of them kick it out of the park, and all three of them had that was an easy addition to sell. Let me say,
Mhm.
it flew, and I I'm about the end product. I'm not. I don't want to. I don't want to deal with anybody who's a criminal. But other than that, I don't care. My business is trying to sell my book.
If every artist is available, let's say,
Yeah.
top three covers you would love to have, with anyone available.
Wow, that's a really good question. Nobody has asked me that. And I mean that as a compliment because I do lots and lots of interviews over my career, and I love it when people say that to me. Um, some are guys that I've already worked with, but I haven't had them do it.
Mhm.
And this gets into if you look at the main covers for the guide, my job is selling the book. So these things are not necessarily my taste.
Mhm.
They're what I think our readers would enjoy,
Mhm.
and that will help me sell the book, which is my job.
Mhm.
That said, man, I would have I haven't ever asked Walter Simonson to do Manhunter. And to me, that single issue reprint on Baxter paper that they did in the 80s,
Mhm.
I use that when I'm trying to teach younger people about what can be done in 8 pages. That it's just that in the spirit, you
Mhm.
know. Um, I tried to get it's Steve Geppe's urging because I was sort of shy about it, which is uncharacteristic. I tried to get Will Eisner to do a spirit story for us, and he actually ended up doing one for Dark Horse eventually, years
Mhm.
later. But and at that point, for about a decade, I had a one of one litho of the cover for #6 on my office wall. He was one of the few people that didn't sell Bob Overstreet as original.
Mhm.
Um, I really wanted that. I really wanted the guide to have a spirit story by Will Eisner. I mean, that would have been, and that's one I'll never get. I would never get. But I did have a spirit. I had Dave Johnson do a spirit cover for the Hero Initiative,
Mhm.
but uh, but having Eisner do that would have been really great. I also probably could have quit after that, and so probably just as well that I didn't. Um, it's always good to have that one that's elusive out there.
Mhm.
Um, I love the ones. I love the ones when Bob calls me and goes, "Oh, I always wanted the issue before the one you held up,
Mhm.
issue 47, the Steranko Batman." That was another call from Bob. I always wanted Steranko, and when I get that from him, I always feel like I'm clicking on all cylinders. Uh, Steve Rude Nexus. Yeah, this is much more about my taste than what I think is going to sell wide in the market.
Right.
We Nexus fans are a devoted lot, but
Mhm.
it's not the biggest draw. The advantage of having multiple covers, I could do a Nexus cover, that
Mhm.
kind of thing like that. I like to do that, and um, I think that would, if it's Steve Rude clicking on all cylinders, I think it would be a majestic cover and inescapably one of the greats.
Mhm.
Um, that's two. What's a third one, man? There are so many great artists that I haven't worked with. I hate to keep defaulting to ones that I have, but I don't have a character in mind. So this is a weird answer, but I really want to work with Mark Chiarello again.
What?
His cover for Batman on #40, and behind the scenes, he had his fingers in at least one cover for the next 8 editions after that, telling me how to work with a certain artist maybe the editors at DC were screwing around.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't mean anything corporately. I just mean like working relationships,
Mm-hmm.
or who had a hole in their schedule and has always wanted to do an Overstreet cover, or working behind the scenes with that artist
Mm-hmm.
and talking to them. Uh, Literally through number 49, Mark did that, but he didn't actually do another cover for me. Um, and he's famous as a baseball artist, as a Star Wars artist, and as a comic guy.
Mm-hmm.
And was so bloody talented and so connected. That's more about the creator than a match of a creator and a character. And like I said, I feel bad saying that when there's so many guys out there I haven't worked with yet.
Right.
I did and there's also guys like on the Hero Initiative cover. It's limited to 500 copies, and they're just 500 hardcover copies, and that's all that's out there. It's a fundraiser for Hero. They get all the money. And a couple of years ago, we had Kevin Nolan do a reinterpretation of Marvel Feature 1, the first appearance of the Defenders. And it was so great. I felt bad that only 500 people were getting it. And that's how this year's Avengers cover came about, because I said, I got to have him on a main cover.
Mm-hmm.
And I was talking to Mark Huseman, our editor for print, and he's like, yeah, it's got to have the Hulk on it too. Look at his Hulk. And so this was and since I'm such a Cap guy, it was so hard to pull the trigger on an Avengers before Avengers 4. But this had both Hulk and Namor on it. And the one thing that he probably the torches and pitchforks crowd after me, but the one thing he absolutely improved on Kirby was he put the Wasp in it. Like, why isn't the Wasp in the original? Maybe she was, and it's just too small for me to see. But that was a bad oversight in my opinion. And so I think Kevin's thing, and when he colors himself, there's only one adjective for his Hulk, and it's incredible.
Well, I think with the plans you were talking to me about maybe these specialized books,
yeah,
that's going to open a lot more covers to a lot more possible artists. So
yeah, absolutely, and it also gets us more specific. What I can't let it do is undermine how cool it is to do the cover for the main guide.
Right.
And it will open up some opportunities. When we were doing the first Lost Universes book, J.G. Jones rediscovered and recolored a Dark Dominion piece for Defiant that had never been published. And JG's done a couple of covers for us. Mm-hmm. And I dropped him a line and said, hey, I'm literally in solicitations right now. Can we use this? And so I created a signed edition that Jim Shooter signed, and because there's a love letter to, I mean, that first one, this last 60 pages of the book is my love letter to Defiant, mm-hmm. because they actually introduced me to Bob and Carol Overstreet.
Wow.
Yeah, when I was freelancing, I did PR for them.
Oh, very cool.
They introduced me to Bob and Carol Overstreet. So yeah, it's
awesome.
something I never forget.
We're going to start to wrap things up, but just want to let fans know what are some ways they can stay in touch with you, so to find out what you're doing, what's going on.
Sure. Facebook, you can find me either under JC Vaughn on my sort of professional aspect page, mm-hmm. or my, hey, I'm going to post lots of cat photos under Jeffrey Vaughn. I'm on Twitter, which I think is JC Vaughn 1, I think. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I'm on Instagram, and again, lots of cat photos, but usually, I'll come up with some comic stuff there too. My cats are characters, and I use them. I think they use me, but they use me in the marketing campaign for my books. I get lots of page views when I post cat photos, so I can't argue. Again, my job's selling the book, right? So, I also I've got. I usually have, when I'm in the comic shops with my stuff rather than crowdfunded, American Mythology is more frequently than not my publisher for that. Though I do work for other publishers. Obviously, I did 24 for IDW, and I wrote some essays on the more Overstreet side for Library of American Comics, both in their collection of the Star Trek newspaper strips, Volume 2, and 2 of the early volumes of Dick Tracy, which we talked about earlier, are being reprinted at the larger size that the subsequent ones came out at. So I'm really excited about that because they'll look better on my shelf. Right now it's like dunk, 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 dunk. So I look forward to those first four being that size. And I'm also editing. I've been the editor on Billy Tucci's Return of the Warrior series. I'm right now, and this is not a lot of editing, but he's crowdfunding Shisenryaku, which was 36 stratagems that Gary Cohn wrote, and it's a proverbial who's who of artists. Everybody from, I mean, literally, when the series came out in 1995, George Perez, Jeff Smith, Dan Jurgens, Jim Lee, Mark Silvestri, Terry Moore, and each of these would illustrate a 2-page spread that told the story of one of the 36 stratagems. Gary was an editor with Billy for a while, but the guy co-created Blue Devil among other things, and is a great writer. And this book will present this art without the text all over it, and then the story will be on a separate page, and it's going to have the process of the art where that's available from the black and white all the way to the color, and it's going to be gorgeous. When last I looked yesterday, he was about less than $2,000 shy of the goal of making it the size of the Marvel omnibuses, and he did that with the Way of the Warrior omnibus, and that came out great. So I'm really excited to be a part of that. Then I'm actually writing. I'm switching hats with Steve Perros. Steve is going to be the editor, and I will write with Billy She Gatecrasher, which is our statement on creator ownership, really. And it's I think it's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to have a lot of we'll have some announced and some really unannounced co-starring characters.
Nice.
That's gonna be a blast. I certainly know that it's going to be some of my only shots to write some of these characters, so I'm excited about that. And let's see, what else do we have? We've got that is a little bit later this year. Might be the next one he crowdfunds, I think. And then right now I'm playing editor for Steve Perros and Barry Orkin on Stoker and Wells, The Ashes of Revenge, which is a sequel to their Stoker and Wells The Order of the Golden Dawn that came out about 3 years ago. Steve has been developing it in the meantime as a TV series. He is capitalizing on the writer's strike right now to get this done, which I've been pestering him for about 3 years. I'm like, when's the next one? When's the next one? And what's really cool is this is a guy who definitely came from the screenwriting world, and yet by halfway through the first book, he got our art form, and he's been friends with he and Barry Orkin, the artist, and Billy Tucci have been friends since 7th grade.
Wow.
And so it wasn't that comics were ever alien to him. It was just this wasn't the thing that he wrote. And now he's basically the writer of She, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, Billy plots, but he's really gravitated to playing with them is a ton of fun. And you have to realize it's got to be fun if I'm going to take my free time and not write. I do enough editing at work. So it's got to be, I usually price my services so people won't take them when it comes to that kind of stuff. So I've got that going on, and maybe the writer's strike will end, and I have a pilot in development with Roddenberry Entertainment that we've been working on for a while, man, but it's freaking good. It is definitely not Star Trek, but it is absolutely in the spirit of Star Trek. And optimism is a choice, and so keeps me off the streets.
You're just a little bit busy.
Absolutely.
Oh man,
Yeah. So,
what you have
and
going on is like a lifetime for some people.
yeah, and as we're recording this, like Tuesday, I head to the retailer summit in Texas, and I'll throw an extra day ahead and ahead and after, and see my family. So
Very nice.
this is gonna be great, and I'm also going to catch up with a lot of retailers there, and hear what they have going on, and it's always a great time to listen to them.
Most definitely. Well, we love listening to you. I'd love to have you back on. There's so many more aspects and topics to talk about, but I just want to thank you for taking the time and all the hard work, not only with the comics but with the Price Guide. This is such an important book to so many fans and to the industry itself. So thank you guys for all the work you do there.
Thank you very much, and I will pass that on to everybody on the staff, because here's the thing, man. I know if you go into San Diego Comic Con,
Mhm.
there's so much to see there. And the same is true for New York or any of the other monster shows, man.
Mhm.
But the truth is that what Bob Overstreet did with the early advisors and getting that information out there is still the foundation of us being able to have those cons, of people understanding that comics had intrinsic monetary value. And I did a book a few years ago called Overstreet at 50. And it's called Overstreet at 50, 5 Decades of the Overstreet Comic Book Price Guide. And so just sort of wrap up by saying, I'm pretty well aware of how special it is that I get to do this for a living. And I wouldn't get to do that for a living without those guys that came before us.
Mhm. So
And so everybody on the staff from Bob on down
100%.
appreciates it. So thank you.
So we are back, and I highly recommend Al Capone Vampire. It is one of the most creative and interesting ideas I've heard from a comic book in a long time. I had the pleasure of, as I mentioned here, talking to Mr. Vaughn at Ithacon, fantastic guy, a baseball fan like myself, and what his comments about how they're going to grade these independent books that are coming out from Kickstarter and all these other things, I thought was really cool, and it's going to sort of guide the way to the future with how these are made.
Yeah, Oren, congrats. Great one-on-one Oren only episode, an interview with JC Vaughn. Seems like an interesting cat. Got a lot of irons in the fire. I'd love to hear more and read more about Al Capone Vampire. Like you said, just such an interesting premise. But that'll do it for this episode. Thank you for listening. Thank you for viewing. Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.